Hello, women of the world. I'm recording this message to celebrate International Women of the World. As we all know, 8th March is the day when International Women's Day is celebrated. And the reason behind this is that the women in 1909, 8th March, around 8th March, women were first ever time allowed to cast vote in a public office. They were allowed to work in public office. Before that, as one of the MP says, that men were having a cozy club in parliaments and in common houses where women were not allowed. Women were condemned to work in maybe factories or just in houses. There were strict rules applied on women, and they have no say. But some of the heroic women, they stood up against this oppression, and they realized the gender gap is unacceptable, and they need to raise their voice against all injustices. So women, unfortunately, 100 years ago, just even in developed world, women in the name of religion, women were exploited in the name of culture, in the name of society, in the name of marriage. In all walks of life, women were not allowed to enjoy, like we are enjoying today, a normal life. So we are extremely lucky, and I believe today we are lucky because of the sacrifices of those women 100 years ago, who fought very hard to get their freedom. They earned their freedom through hard fights. So we must not take this freedom for granted, and I believe we must stand up for ourselves and for our upcoming generation of our daughters, nieces, our sisters. We should stand up, and we should not allow massive gender gaps. We should not allow oppression of women. We must work together for the freedom, for the education, and for the health and well-being of our women in all parts of the world. Unfortunately, 100 years ago, 100 years old oppression is still visible in some parts of the world, and we must. Our journey hasn't ended. That women are allowed to vote is not enough. We must progress, and we must continue our hard work towards women's voice. As we know, just a little bit history to catch up. 1909 was the time when women were first time allowed in New York, followed by 1910, and some 100 women gathered in Copenhagen after many massive demonstrations, and they started celebrating the day when they were allowed to cast their vote and hold public office. Similarly, in Soviet era, 1913, women were allowed to vote or given their suffragette, given their suffrage. So they were suffragettes, because they were given suffrage. Similarly, in United Kingdom, women, especially leader women, the activist women like Sylvia Pankhurst, they fought very hard to earn their freedom of suffrage or right to vote in 1914. United Nations in 1965 and then in 1975 acknowledged the extraordinary accomplishments of women in all walks of life, and decided to celebrate this day, 8th March. Every year, 8th March is International Women's Day. Unfortunately, in some Muslim countries and developing world, women today are still suffering. Just women 100 years ago, they were suffering in developed world. So I believe it's our responsibility that we must raise our voice. All women all over the world need education, health, and their freedom to vote, and their freedom to raise their voice. And we must work against gender gap, honor killings, women oppression, women harassment, and we must learn lesson from the history. Another I would like to give advice to women that they don't need to stand against men, rather they need to work on themselves, and they need to stand for themselves, and they should come out of they must come out of their comfort zone, just for their future generation. And with this, thank you very much for listening. Happy International Women's Day.